Attention sports teams. Let us introduce you to the best fan engagement tool in the game, .vote. By getting a .vote web address for your team, you can allow fans to engage and interact with big-time decisions. In a single click, not only can fans make their opinions heard, but sports teams get a better understanding of their fans' interests. Keep your fans engaged. Simply visit GoDaddy.com today, type in the desired name of your web address, and let the voting begin.
Daboll's out of time. The Jets reset the clock. The dumbest sports betting scandal so far. And we're joined by championship belt maker Dan Van Alst, all right now on a fresh edition of Gordon Damer on Sports. Welcome into episode number 54 of Gordon Damer on Sports. Jam-packed episode for today. Lots to get into with the NFL. The Giants finally making the move, firing Brian Daboll as head coach, and how they're already screwing things up. Who's the next head coach? We'll float some names, but the Giants are already messing it up with the way they're handling things. Even the easy stuff they're screwing up. So we'll hit on that. We'll touch on the Jets and all the moves they made at the trade deadline and why it's the right approach for the long term. And we'll get into the latest, and I guess you would say by far the dumbest sports betting scandal that we've had so far. But look, the week is still young. And we're going to talk some championship wrestling belts with Dan Van Alst. He is better known as BeltsByDan, has done championship belts for everyone and anyone, New Japan Pro Wrestling, AEW, the Yankees, whole bunch of different companies. So we'll talk some championship belts and the attachment that we as wrestling fans have to wrestling belts and where that comes from, and a guy who started out as a wrestling fan and turned that into a business. So it's an interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it. But before we get too deep into things, I have to remind you, as I do always, please hit that subscribe button, like the episode, comment, share the episode if you can. It really does help out the podcast. And of course, in the coming days, we're going to have announce our winner for the Nick Ticket giveaway for later this month. And you have to be subscribed on YouTube for your chance to win those tickets. So make sure you are subscribed on YouTube. You can listen anywhere you get your podcast, but make sure you are subscribed on YouTube. All right, let's get into it with the football. It finally happened. The Giants making it clear Brian Daboll's days as Giants head coach officially come to an end on Monday after yet another fourth quarter collapse. It's almost like Mad Libs at this point. You can just kind of fill in the blank for whatever team the Giants were going to collapse in the fourth quarter. This time it just so happened to be the Chicago Bears, and it was a game that kind of summed up everything that has gone wrong for this team, especially this year, but really for the last 3 years. The Giants blew another double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. They lost another winnable game, and they proved, once and for all, I guess, Brian Daboll is just simply not an NFL head coach. He's not a good head coach. And this was the easiest thing in the world to predict, even before kickoff on Sunday. You could see this coming from a mile away. It was not a question of if Brian Daboll was going to get fired. It was simply a question of when. We talked about the swing game and how it's very hard for you to envision the Giants winning a whole bunch more games. And they had another opportunity on Sunday, and it's unbelievable that they blew another lead in the fourth quarter. But that was the final nail in Brian Daboll's coffin. So now the question is, what comes next, and whether they're going to actually learn from their mistakes or if they're just going to kind of keep spinning in the same sad cycle that has defined this franchise for more than a decade now. And I got to tell you, the early returns, if you're a New York Giant fan, are not good. Now, look, it's crazy. It's crazy to me that even as of last week, people were still preaching patience, as if patience somehow was the problem for the Giants. The Giants are now 2-8. That is not just... Right now, the Giants would have the third pick in the NFL draft. That is bottom of the barrel. And it's the third straight year that the Giants have been 2-8. They were 20-40-1 with Brian Daboll as their head coach. In the history of the NFL, guys who coached 50 games, who got a real shot, only 17 coaches in the history of the NFL have a worse winning percentage than Brian Daboll. And even guys that you, in your mind's eye, you think that guy's the worst head coach. Adam Gase, Rich Kotite, they have better winning percentages. John McKay, who started out 2-26, he's just slightly worse than Brian Daboll. And these games just kept popping up, and it's not really a surprise that this happened, but you go through the different games and how it could have been different if they just had somewhat better coaching. The Dallas game, up by 3 points with 14 seconds to go and they lose. The Saints game, you should never be losing to them. I don't care how many times you turn the ball over. It's the Saints. The Bronco game was clearly the pivot point for this season. You think about how these things went wrong. And then again on Sunday against Chicago, keep in mind, that is a prime example of simply a team that doesn't know how to finish. And it gets down to one simple thing. It cuts down to coaching, right? They're good enough to get these leads. And in most cases, not just one thing has to go wrong. Everything has to go wrong for them to blow it, especially the Denver game. So firing Brian Daboll, that's the easy part. But if we're being honest, I would have kept him for the rest of the season because it's very simple. All that there's left to accomplish this year is making sure that the Giants' head coaching job is as appealing and as attractive as humanly possible. That's what you're playing for now. You're not playing spoiler. You're not, trying to get some meaningless wins to build momentum for next season. That's not what we're talking about. You don't need to win some December games that are just simply going to drop you down the draft board. We've seen that already happen with the Giants. A couple of years ago, they won some meaningless games, and it allowed them to keep Brian Daboll. That's not what this is about. The last thing the Giants need is to rattle off a couple of garbage time wins and go from picking third to picking ninth. That would be the most Giants thing imaginable. They've made a living out of doing that enough under the last few coaches. I would simply say lose out. And with Brian Daboll, I had a pretty good confidence level that the Giants were going to do that. Because that's how you fix this franchise. You don't need any fake momentum. You need to be able to acquire talent. You need a direction, and you need a real reset. Real reset. Not just simply surface level stuff. And it seems like the Giants are already screwing this up. How can it be that the Giants have made the decision in their mind? You know what? The only problem we have is coaching. Because they announced that Joe Schoen is staying on as GM, and at least for now, he's going to help them pick the next head coach. Now, I would say, let's see if that actually does turn out to be the case. Because there's still a lot of football left to play. And if this thing goes down the way it's pointed right now, I think it's going to be hard for the Giants to keep Joe Schoen at the end of the season. And it's hard to see how Joe Schoen also survives that. Because what you're admitting, if you're saying, oh, the coaching is the only problem, and he's the reason why the roster underachieved, well, then why would you let the guy who hired this terrible head coach, which we've already established, we don't need to nitpick all the different reasons, we know them. Why would you let the guy who picked him pick the next guy? Why does he get a free pass? If the coach stinks, the GM stinks by extension. That's how it works. So if you want a real reset, you can't go halfway. You can't talk about accountability and then keep the guy who set this whole thing in motion. Again, Joe Schoen got here first. He had a hand in hiring Brian Daboll. You need a clean sweep. No more patience, no more half measures. Daboll's gone. Schoen should go with him. If you want to keep him to the rest of the season, that's fine. But what's the case for keeping Joe Schoen? The only success the two of them had together was in the first year when Schoen couldn't do anything because Dave Gettleman screwed up the cap as bad as he did. And Brian Daboll was actually able to coach with those players and win some games. It makes absolutely no sense. So I have to hope that at some point the Giants will come to their senses. But again, it is the Giants. So already the talk has begun that the Giants need to hire a real head coach, a head coach with experience. And look, that's not a terrible idea. That guy has to exist because the times that the Giants have gone for the high ceiling guys, the first-time head coaches, Ben McAdoo, Daboll, Joe Judge, each of those guys were a disaster in their own ways. And when things went sideways, they didn't seem like they knew what to do. So probably the next guy should be someone with real NFL experience, a real NFL resume, and someone who's been through it before. But here's why they can't screw it up again. Because there's two types of experienced coaches. And again, would I like an experienced coach? Yes, but that guy has to exist. Who is the guy you are talking about? Because one of the first names that is being mentioned as a possibility. To me, that's not the kind of experience you need. And that the Giants being the Giants, they will probably fall into the category of chasing the experienced coach who just has the resume. And the big name that's floating out there, and it was even floating out there before Brian Daboll got fired, it was the name Bill Belichick. You know it, I know it, John Mara certainly knows it. The second the job opened up, Belichick to the Giants rumors started bubbling up. And look, I don't have to sit here and tell you why I could understand a world why that would seem appealing on the surface, right? All the 6 Super Bowls with the Patriots, 8 Super Bowls in total, one of the greatest head coaches in the history of the organization, and a coach who does have a deep tie to the Giants organization. And look, he is desperate for another shot at the NFL after how things ended in New England. But here's the problem. That version of Bill Belichick, the one that people still picture in their heads, the hoodie, the Super Bowl genius head coach, that guy doesn't exist anymore. That Bill Belichick you remember is gone. What remains is what, a 74-year-old coach who has been kind of exposed as the definition of the game has passed him by. You don't have to take my word for it. Look at the way things ended in New England. Look at the staff he has put together at North Carolina. Look at the people he has surrounded himself with. The man's out here. You can't tell me he has the same passion as someone 10 years ago. He's off spending his bye week in Nantucket with his 24-year-old girlfriend after getting his doors blown off at North Carolina. You think that's the guy who's coming in to rebuild the Giants, the 74-year-old? Again, the Giants need to be rebuilt. They don't need somebody. The coach is not coming in here as the final piece of the puzzle. It's a big piece of the puzzle, but it's not the final piece. The Giants need a lot of work. Yes, I think the roster might be more talented than what we've seen. God, let's hope so. And I don't want to get into the whole Belichick-Brady debate, but does it seem like he's a guy that has adapted with the times? Because I thought that was what was going to happen in North Carolina. He was going to be the mad genius, kind of reinventing himself at the college level, ticked off at the hits to his reputation and all that type of stuff. That has not happened. Belichick seems like a guy who is living off his reputation, even as his reputation now kind of becomes like a laughingstock. So there's the wins and the losses aspect of it, which is not, to me, in his favor. And then there's all the extra noise, the weirdness, the whole girlfriend situation. If you're thinking that Belichick is the guy who's going to go back in the cold, calculated, laser-focused genius, I think that guy is gone. And I don't think you're getting him back. And Belichick, to me at least, seems like a guy who's just trying to stay relevant and chasing fame. It seems like he is addicted to the spotlight and is willing to do anything to stay in it, even joining Instagram. The Giants do not need that. They do not need nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. They need something that has a bit of a future. And reaching into the past, that is the Giants' playbook. And maybe for once, they should try to avoid the playbook. Like, their first instinct probably is not the right instinct. The last few first instincts have not worked out. Now, if you want to go, and I don't say that you have to have a guy with experience, but if we're having the experienced coaching route, Mike McCarthy, I know it's not going to be a sexy name. I can hear the groans from Giant fans, but it seems like a far more likely scenario to lead to success. He's had far more success recently. The guy's 60 games over 500 as a head coach. In 18 seasons, 11 of those, he won double-digit games. And say what you want about him. Is he perfect? No, but he's a professional. He doesn't bring any outside noise. I have no fears that Mike McCarthy is going to be focused on anything than running a football team as well as he can run it. He's going to be stable. He's going to be competent. And right now, stability and competence, that would feel like a fresh new step. And let's add in the fact he's probably about 15 years younger. Now, are the Giants going to win a Super Bowl with Mike McCarthy? Probably not. I don't know who's going to get the job, but the Giants are probably not going to win a Super Bowl with that guy either. Stop thinking about the ceiling and let's at least focus on the floor. And that's what this hire should be about. Stability and competence, leadership. Someone who is not an offensive guru or the hot young mind with the playbook who's the new play caller in the league. You need a head coach, someone who's a coach of the entire team. We focused on the offensive problems with Daboll and just kind of cast aside the defensive problem. He's not the offensive coordinator. He's the head coach of the team. And unfortunately, with the Giants, you really can't trust their judgment anymore. So you need someone who if we're talking about going down the established head coach route, you need someone who you know what you're getting. And Mike McCarthy, you know what you're getting. You know the flaws, you know the strengths. Again, the guy won basically 11, 12 games in Dallas every single year. And if he comes here, it's not an experiment. It's not like, hey, he's going to grow into the job. He comes in and day one, you know what you're going to get. Now, I'm not saying it has to be McCarthy. We still have a lot of time before this season's over. The offseason comes. Maybe a real coach with a real track record shakes loose somewhere off this offseason. People have mentioned, you know what? Maybe this season ends and Sean McVay decides he wants a change of scenery. If that's the case, end the conversation. Done deal. Back up the truck. Whatever draft picks, okay, fine. Big contract, okay, fine. Because that's the guy you end the conversation, or someone along those lines. Usually there's an established coach that it's a surprise that he gets moved and is off the job that he has. But that's the kind of hire that if that's a possibility, we don't have to have a conversation anymore. But again, you're not hiring a personality. You are hiring someone to come in here and build the program. You think you have some pieces. I would still say this roster is light years away. And I would do anything and everything to make sure that Joe Schoen is not taking this job, which should be one of the most appealing jobs, if not the most appealing job. Think of what you're walking into. A long-time, successful organization that's not had success, really of any kind, for over a decade. You're walking in with the quarterback in place. You're walking in with what's almost certainly going to be a top 5 pick. You have some pieces on offense. You have some pieces on defense. So we've been here before with the Giants. We've watched this team cycle through things. To me, I want to do everything I can to make sure that this job is as appealing as possible, and allowing Joe Schoen to hang around and influence the next hire. I think that reduces the ceiling for what that type of candidate can be, because he is part of this current regime. If you were a guy who had options, would you want to go someplace where you get to kind of call the shots? Or do you want to go someplace with a GM who you walk in the door and he's already on the hot seat? Again, when things go wrong, who's going to get blamed? Now, that might work out for the head coach because then he'll get more power and get Joe Schoen out of there. I don't want any more turnover. I want to get the turnover out of the way. And I would say getting rid of Joe Schoen is the right job, not just for the GM, but for the head coach as well. So, look, Brian Daboll's gone. He certainly earned it. His team blew leads. His team regressed. It's been a disaster here for the last 3 years. He is not a good head coach. And whether or not he gets an opportunity to be a head coach ever again, we will have to wait. It's going to take a while before I think anybody's going to give him that chance. But for the New York Giants, they have to be focused on the future. And the future is not just picking the head coach. It's about making the job as appealing as humanly possible. They have a lot of things going in their direction, but they have to be able to handle even the simple stuff. So lose out, secure a top pick, and then make the clean sweep after the season. Get rid of Joe Schoen, bring in a real front office, and get to work. Stop shooting yourself in the foot. Stop making the same mistakes over and over again. Again, what the Giants are going through right now is supposed to be the easy part. Going from laughingstock to just simply mediocre. That's supposed to be step one. All the other steps, they're a lot harder. And yet the Giants are tripping over their feet on the most basic parts of the job. Hopefully, when this season ends, they will get to the business of bringing their franchise back. And that means a clean sweep of getting rid of Joe Schoen and going out and having a real search for a GM and a head coach who are going to be paired together and can finally get this organization out of the doldrums. All right, now we're joined by, you might know him as Belt Fan Dan or BeltsByDan, his championship belt maker, Dan Van Alst, who's nice enough to give us a few minutes tonight to talk a little bit about wrestling and wrestling belts. Dan, thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, Gordon, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Well, I got to be honest. I really feel like you are a very inspiring story for a sports fan who grew up as a wrestling fan and has now turned that into a business. Can you kind of give us the Cliff Notes version of how someone goes from a fan of wrestling to becoming a belt maker?
Yeah, well, as a fan growing up, especially in New York, it was all WWF.
Sure.
And the thing that always stood out to me with wrestling was the belts. And growing up as a kid, Bret Hart, my favorite wrestler, had what you see above me, the
Hmm.
classic IC. And that's the belt that made me fall in love with belts. And then years later, throughout my fandom, I realized you can actually get real belts. You can get the stuff on TV, not just a toy in a store.
Hmm.
So that year, I was a senior in high school, and I worked two jobs, saved enough money, and I bought a real Reggie Parks made belt. And Reggie Parks was the gentleman who made the belts for WWF at the time.
Hmm.
And back then, collecting wasn't what it is now. People only had maybe one belt, if that. So, you know, that could have been the end of my collection right there. But as the internet took off, as wrestling got more popular, belts became a thing. And I was always a fan of belts, always followed them, always kept an eye on them. And eventually I made friends with some of the belt makers by going to conventions and meeting up and finding new friends. And over time, what happened was people needed belts, and there was only a few people making the belts. And when you have a huge demand, but a limited number of people who can make them, opportunities happen. So my good friend Conrad Thompson, I got him a lot of the belts in his collection, and he kind of introduced me to the business side of it. And he was one of the first people who said, "Hey, you know a lot about belts. You know the histories, you know the makers, you know the difference of details of the belts. Why not just try to do it yourself?" And I started off doing leather work because
Hmm.
that's the most time consuming and really the part that really separates somebody from an amateur and a professional. The leather work, still to this day, I have to practice and work on stuff, and I'm always trying to improve. So I started by releathering the replica belts and started doing repair work on the side. And then eventually Conrad came to me and said, "I need a belt for my office for our fantasy football. Make me a belt." He kind of he put the challenge in front of me, and it was like, put up or shut up. And it got started from there, and then it's just been a snowball rolling downhill ever since.
And it feels like it, and this is somebody who's just a lover of belts and has no actual knowledge of what goes in, but it seems like such different skill sets between the leather work and the plating, and I'm assuming
Yeah.
there's a lot of computer knowledge that goes into it. Do you learn that as you go, or do you kind of just jump in both feet forward?
A lot of people ask, I want to be a belt maker. What do I do? And it's not that simple. Like you said, there are so many different aspects. So usually if somebody has a background in one specific field, I try to say, "Hey, you're good with computers, you're good at graphic design. Get good with Adobe Illustrator and start making artwork. Then as you get comfortable with the artwork, then you can start learning your leather on the side. The metal work tends to be where a lot of people outsource it,
Hmm.
specifically because of the way the belts were made classically. The plates are etched with acid. And a lot of the times in many states, hazmat laws and regulations, most people can't do that in their basement or can't do that at their work. But now, with the modern day CNC milling machines, there are people who can make a belt from scratch in their basement with all of the technology. The metalworking, learning to stud weld, learning to cut metal, learning to curve metal, and then the electroplating. A lot of people kind of overlook the electroplating. How do you get from raw metal to the final finished product? And with the type of base metal being used, the most important aspect is copper plating, not necessarily gold or nickel or silver. It's the copper. That's the first layer you put on, and everything comes on over that. And again, New York being a little bit of a nanny state, the best type of copper plating that I've seen and use is based with cyanide. And you can't do that at home. You
Even
need
I know
Right.
that.
You need
Right.
OSHA regulations, you need to pass. So a lot of the times, a lot of the people will just send it to a professional to get the plating done, which is I'm one of those people. I don't do my own copper. I've tried to do it a few times using an acid-based, doesn't come out as well. So part of being a belt maker too is knowing your limitations. Can you do every single step yourself? Yes. Will it take a lot more time? Will you mess up? Yes. So try everything, stick to your strengths, outsource where you can, and then, put your full skill set into something like the leather or the design that will make people really, appreciate your skills.
So when you start making the first couple of belts, is it still just a hobby at that point? At what point do you realize, hey, you know what? I'm good enough that this can be a business for me.
I've always had a side hustle,
Mhm.
whether it's doing the leather work or with the replica belts. I would buy them, fix them up, clean them up, and resell them, flipping belts. And I made the one belt for Conrad, and then I made another belt for a different client. And then another wrestling promoter that I was introduced to at one of these conventions is like, "Hey, I'm in a pickle. Somebody said you're starting to make belts now. Can you help me out?" And that was somebody who I later realized had a lot of connections in the wrestling world. That was Mr. David Marquez of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood.
Mhm.
And he had a specific belt that was stolen, and he needed me to replace it. I did it for him. And between him and Conrad, they really spread my name around to a lot of the independent promotions, and then eventually the wrestlers, and then the bigger promotions. So it's building your clientele step by step, and not understanding that, hey, this person might unlock all of these doors for you in the future. So you take every client as they come as an opportunity to improve your business. And then just like with all the other belt makers I was mentioning earlier, once my name got out, I'm turning down orders now. And then when you start getting overwhelmed and overloaded, that's when you're like, well, should I make this a business? Can this be something I can do as a full-time job? And there are many people that can do it. But for me, I have four kids, I'm married, house, the whole thing. It's like, let's set our priorities straight. This is a good side gig. Who knows? Like the economy can crash tomorrow, or I can get hurt and can't do leather work anymore. So I stick to my 9 to 5, and then the belt stuff is just stuff on the side. And part of that I enjoy too, because now it's not a full-time business where I have to do it. I can take the clients that I like working with, or I can take on the projects that seem interesting to me. I'm not just doing it because I have to do it. I'm still doing it because I love it. And the day that I feel like I'm forced to do the belts, I'm forced to make it, it's not fun anymore, and that's when I'm going to step away.
What's the most rewarding part for you at this point?
The most rewarding part is seeing your stuff being used on TV, being used on posters and merchandise, and like going to a store and seeing an action figure with a little copy of your belt. It's like really crazy because like my kids are like, "Dad, why are you getting toys in the mail?" And it's like, well, Daddy made that. So like they're nice enough to send me a copy of it, or so, stuff like that. Like, and then some of the wrestlers too, the reactions from the wrestlers like reach out to me and like, "Oh man, I love this belt." And some of them want copies for themselves because that's how much they appreciate it. And then like that, it really makes me feel like my work is being appreciated.
You've done belts for tons of companies. I don't know which ones you can share, which ones you can't, but I know one that you can share. I'm pretty sure is that you did the I think it's the game belt for the New York Yankees. You grew up as
Yes.
a Yankee fan. What was that? What was that process like, and how was it a little surreal when that call comes in?
Right. That is something that you don't expect. There's a lot of things that you never expect. I'm doing belts as a side business. I'm a nobody. And then I get an email from the rail riders. And it started off with, "Hey, I listened to this podcast that you sponsor. A couple of the guys on the team want to do a player of the game belt." And then we started going through the process for doing that. And then halfway through the process, the person from the Rail Riders says, "The main team wants a belt too. I pitched them your name. If you get a message from this person, I put in a good word for you." And that's how the ball got rolling on that. So with the Yankees belt, they reached out and they said, "We want to do a player of the game. We want a belt that just for the guys in the locker room. After every game, they'll give it out." And I said, "Yeah, perfect. Like, what do you want? Like, where do we start with this?" And uh, at the time, Tommy Canley was on the Yankees, and actually we went to the same high school, not together, but so that small world, another connection. But he was a big WWF fan, so he wanted the classic WWF winged eagle, which copyright trademark I can't do. I can't
Right.
make other people's stuff. So I put together like a few templates and said, tell me what you want, I'll do it. And it was like one of the people from the equipment team with their phone with the pictures like showing it, and they're just walking around the locker room and someone's like, oh, change this, add this, I want to see this. So there was a little bit of input from everyone on the team. So I did that original belt for them, and then a few years later I get another call saying, oh, Aaron Judge wants another belt, but this time he wants pinstripes on it. So that was the challenge on the next belt. Now it's all right, it's got to be a white belt with pinstripes. So that's how that belt came across. And now I'm doing another belt where I might add some like Tiffany blue, because a lot of the players are starting to add that Tiffany blue to their gear. So like constantly changing, keeping up with what the style is and trying to add little traits and characteristics to make it their own. So yeah, I was fortunate enough to do that belt for the Yankees, and then that steamrolled into Nick Swisher wanting one for the team down at spring training in Tampa. So I've done a few belts for the Yankees, and a couple of other teams have reached out too. And that now you don't even have to watch wrestling. Now you can
Yeah.
watch other sports, and belts are starting to cross over from just wrestling over into all the other sports.
Yeah, it really does show you the influence the wrestling has beyond just wrestling. And to
Right.
me, I know you said it was earlier than that, but to me, it was like when I think it was the Pistons 2004, 2005,
Right.
Rasheed Wallace shows up at the press conference. He's got like the big
Right.
gold. I didn't
Yeah.
even realize that that was a possibility. It was like an aha
Right.
moment to an outsider. Was that
Right.
a moment you saw the industry kind of take a jump?
That moment had a huge impact throughout the industry. Like, wrestling impacted the pro sports with the belts, but when Rasheed Wallace and gave all of the Pistons the big gold belt, that was a symbol of WCW, who was
Hmm.
out of business at the time. And WWE started seeing the amount of outside sports and teams using that design. And I think that's part of the reason why now all of the WWE belts, the big focal point is that big WWE logo right in the middle. Because now they put the team names on the side plates, and then they give them to whoever wins a championship. And when everybody has their championship parade, you see that WWE logo front and center. So it's starting to go back and forth, cross marketing, cross promotion. And yeah, definitely the Pistons were a huge part of that too.
We're talking, of course, with Dan Van Alst, Belts by Dan. You've known him as Belt Fan Dan as well on social media. He's all over the place making belts for all different types of companies. What's the process like when a company comes to you or a collector comes to you and says, I want to make this kind of belt, and you're coming up with something new? Is it a lot of input from the person? Do you kind of take control of that? How does that work?
Usually it's a back and forth either through an email, or we'll do like a meeting like this. And some clients have something in mind,
Mhm.
whether it's a picture, whether it's just a bunch of stuff they've written down. Sometimes they even sketch it, which helps. And then other times it's just like, we want a belt. We know nothing about it. We trust you. Sell us on something. So
Right.
usually it's the biggest hurdle is a design and a budget. Everybody's got a budget to work in. And I tell people all the time, this is my base price, but the sky is the limit. If you want to put real diamonds and real jewels in this, if you want to use solid, precious stone, solid metal, stacked plates, anything you can think of, it's jewelry. It's glorified jewelry. So if you think of it going into a jewelry store and how they can customize a chain for you, I can do the same thing for a belt.
Talking about belt and the collecting space, it does seem like it's kind of fraught with some scams between online stuff and some belt makers as well. I don't know. I don't want you to rip anybody that you're friends with, but it does seem like some other big names involved in the
Yeah.
industry have gotten into trouble because they're trying to almost mass produce belts at a pace that's just not realistic. How do you think that trouble kind of starts for some of these big names?
Well, when you have a big name out there and everybody knows you, everybody wants to use you.
Hmm.
And in this business, people are paying you thousands of dollars up front without you actually providing the product. I try to keep myself from falling to that same trap. It's not just one or two people. There's literally a dozen people that have fallen into this trap. You give people money up front, they're going to spend it. They're going to, assume that the profit is there, not realizing, oh, something might come up where you're going to have to spend a little extra money. And then that happens two times and three times. And then the money's there. It keeps coming in, but you're not actually working for it. And people get comfortable with that, too comfortable. And after a while, that's how people get scammed. It's not intentional. It's just the money is there and you don't have to do anything for it. And a lot of people fall into that trap. Now, on the flip side, there's always this type of scammers who are taking pictures of my work or taking
Yeah.
pictures of established belt makers' work and saying, this is what I can make for you, this is my product. And then when you order it, you get something that looks nothing like it. Like that's a traditional scam that also goes on. But a lot of the stuff happening online is impersonation, where there's people who are stealing my work, copying my work, making illegal copies, and then trying to pass it off as if they made the one being used on TV in order to generate more business for themselves.
Yeah. How do you protect yourself against that? Is it just that the work is just not going to be as good as yours and it kind of takes care of itself, or do you have to take steps to make sure that that doesn't happen?
All of my designs I've filed federal copyright on. And unfortunately, the way the copyright system is, somebody has to be an American-based company or living in a country that recognizes American intellectual property laws. I would say 99% of the counterfeits out there are coming from Pakistan,
Hmm.
and Pakistan does not recognize intellectual property laws. So it's up to American companies and border or excuse me when you get inbound parcels from foreign countries, customs, they're not going to go through that. They don't really care about counterfeit belts coming. So,
Yeah.
but the quality, like you said, that's always going to be the number one difference in it. If I'm charging thousands of dollars for a belt, but you're going on Amazon and buying it for $200,
Hmm.
you shouldn't expect to get the same thing. And most people understand that. And I think there is also a certain group of people who welcome it. They just want a cheap copy of something that they saw on TV. It's going to sit on a shelf. They're not going to play with it. As long as it looks good enough and it doesn't fall apart, they're fine with it. And unfortunately, like I try to warn people about that, and it is theft, but you know how it is. Like we grew up in Napster.
Right.
We're downloading music. Like it's gonna happen, and I just try my best to try to warn people about the pitfalls of it.
If someone wants to start a belt collection, what advice would you give to them starting out?
Well, every collector falls into the same trap. They want every belt they see. I want. But this one, that one,
Yeah.
every, and unfortunately, some of those belts, not every belt is available in a legal replica copy. So that's how they really get sucked into the counterfeit collection scene very quickly because they probably want a copy of an obscure belt from the 80s that nobody makes. My recommendation to any collector is just do your research. See what belts that you actually want are available. Some belts have many different versions with many different qualities, and it all depends on how much money you're comfortable spending. Then for the more advanced collectors, when you have tons of belts, I think it starts to become the collection mentality of quality over quantity, where if all of your belts are coming from WWE shop, they're great replica belts, but what's the step above that? Well, that's when you get into the real authorized, licensed, handmade copies made by the original makers. And for me, that's where I do a lot of business on the secondhand market because I have so many contacts in the field and I'm able to acquire some of these rare belts that were made by the original makers, including the ring used belts. And that's really where I tend to have a unique angle on the market where if somebody wants the belt that was used on TV on this date, I probably know where it is, or I know who has it, and I can try to work a deal to get it for you. And that's not something that most people can offer or have the resources to acquire.
You've worked with and you knew, Reggie Parks and Dave Milliken and all these legendary names in this field. Is there something you want your legacy to be when you're done making belts, whenever that is?
I think I think my legacy is going to be based on the most famous belt I'm known for, which is the IWGP
Hmm.
V5. And unfortunately, it replaced the V4 right next to it.
Yep.
Most people, including myself, that's probably one of the top three most beautiful belts of all time. And I think my legacy is going to be I'm the guy who replaced the nicest belt of all time. And the V5, I love it. It's
Yeah.
like a child to me. I didn't design it. The company came to me with a design. I knew what they had in mind, and I did my best to execute it. So that will be my legacy for most people when I'm on a surface level. I think for anybody who's been in the belt hobby long enough or part of the community, they'll hopefully have a better understanding of who I was as a collector and an ambassador for the hobby, and hopefully think of me as more than just the guy who made the V5.
I think that's obviously going to be the case. I think you're being a little too hard on yourself. Is there one belt that you've not made yet? Is there, you're somebody who's built this business, on your own strengths and talents. Is there a belt that you've not made yet that you want to make in the future?
I've always wanted to make a UFC belt, not the belt that they're currently using, not a previous belt, but I've trained in mixed martial arts for almost 20 years. So like I've breathed and lived that life in the gym day in, day out. I've had fights, I've gotten ready for fights. Like, some people are like, oh, you should make a belt and try to win it. It's like, no, I just want wrestling is one thing. I'm not a wrestler.
Mhm.
Making belts for baseball teams is one thing. I don't play pro baseball. I'm in MMA. I do jujitsu. I do kickboxing. Like if I could do a belt for a company that I'm actually ingrained with, I think that would be like kind of like the cherry on the top of what you consider my belt making career. But yeah, the UFC was probably the one that I would want to make that I haven't made yet.
I don't know if you said this before. The classic IC, is that your favorite belt of all time? Even though you didn't make
Yeah.
it, but that's
Yes.
the one you fell in love with.
That kick started it, and it holds up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's still, I mean, it still is the fantastic belt. I don't know what exactly, maybe it is the wrestlers that are associated with it. To me, I look at that and I see the Macho Man,
Yeah.
so there's such a great lineage of that belt. I don't even know what intercontinental necessarily means, but growing up, that was the belt. I almost felt like that belt was better than, and I know the
Yes.
big gold is the one that gets the most, probably the most attention overall because it is so, that's what a championship belt looks like. But to me, that's still the classic.
I think it's based on our childhoods.
Yeah.
Like there's that sweet spot in our childhood where like everything was perfect before we kind of figured out what the world really was.
Yeah.
And like for, we're similar like with the classic IC, it was Macho Man, it
Yeah.
was Ricky Steamboat, it
Yeah.
was Mr. Perfect, it was Bret Hart, it was Shawn Michaels.
Hmm.
I think we're going to be experiencing a new generation of belt collectors who are going to unfortunately idolize the spinner belt, which
Right.
like,
Yeah.
oh, back when I was a kid,
Sure.
spinner belt, I loved it. And like you're going to have all the nostalgia for like the belts that we don't understand. But I think it also goes back to where you grew up too, because before the internet and even before cable, the belts that you saw on TV were based on where you lived. Like you
Yeah.
lived in New York. I didn't see the big gold unless I was buying a magazine. And
Hmm.
Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes
Right.
with
It was
it.
like a
Only
revelation
saw
when you found, like, who are these guys? Like I wasn't even aware of who these guys were at
right.
first.
I never got a chance to really see that belt on TV, so the
Yeah.
connection wasn't there. Same thing with like the NWA Heavyweight Championship. Where you grew up, what your age, I think that really has a huge impact on the belts that you kind of connect and click with.
Obviously, you're at the top of your industry. How much longer do you want to do this?
I'll keep going until it's not fun anymore.
Hmm.
Until it, like I said earlier, like when I'm have to do it, where not like deadlines are one thing. I understand, like I make the agreement, but when it's like, all right, I need to make X amount of belts this month, and it's like just dreading it and getting to
Hmm.
it, like it's not enjoyable. Like it's an outlet. You need your creative outlet to get whatever's inside of you, just out working with your hands, and that's it for me. So until it becomes a chore, or until I find something else that's equally as fulfilling, I will probably keep doing belts until I die.
Belts by Dan. You can find them all over social media. You can find, what's the website? BeltsByDan.com.
Yes.
There you go. I mean, he doesn't need your business. He's got obviously more than enough stuff rolling in. Dan,
Yeah.
thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate it. I do love your work. It's really inspirational.
No problem. Thank you for the kind words, and I appreciate you having me on.
All right, let's move over to the Jets, which, look, I know it's kind of old news by now, but we didn't really hit on the NFL trade deadline when it happened. And what the Jets did at the deadline, they were the busiest team, right? By far at the NFL trade deadline. And I think they did something really smart. I don't know if it was necessarily by design, but it was really smart all the same. And I've seen a lot of mixed results from Jet fans. Some are optimistic about the future now that they have all this draft capital. And then you've got the other side saying, we're kind of rebuilding off of rebuilding. Like, here's another rebuild. We were just doing a rebuild and now we're rebuilding again. We didn't get any fruit from the last rebuild and we're already rebuilding again. Couple of things to be clear on. In the NFL, really in any sport, but especially in the NFL, if you can't show any progress, then you have to sell hope. There's a great line from the TV show Mad Men. If you don't like what people are saying, change the conversation. And what the Jets did at the NFL trade deadline did that, even before the wins, even before winning 2 in a row. The Jets right now, by loading up on future draft picks, they're not selling wins, they're selling hope, long-term hope. It completely changed the focus of where the fan base was at. And look, stockpiling picks is fun. It's like NFL Monopoly money, right? Every fan loves thinking of themselves as the GM. You get ready for the draft. Oh, it's phenomenal. But let's be honest, the Jets aren't in the position that they're in right now because they lack draft capital. They're in this spot because they consistently missed on how to develop that capital once they had it. Still, this is the smart long-term play. If you're a head coach or a GM in the NFL, and look, maybe this is about filtering out the guys who don't fit with Aaron Glenn's vision, big contracts, not necessarily the production to match. And they're trying to rebuild it now with a certain personality in mind and rebuilding the locker room. But again, even if that is the case, best case scenario, those draft picks are at least 2-3 years away from giving you any real answers. That's just how the NFL development works, right? They'll have a draft this year. You're going to have to find out about that guy in year 1, but you won't have an answer for sure. And if you're Aaron Glenn, if you're a head coach with 2 wins on the year, this is also about survival. This kind of extends your timeline. It moves the goalposts from we're bad to we're rebuilding. Because again, the Jets are worse this year than basically anybody thought they were going to be. So next year, they're certainly going to have a rookie quarterback, right? That's another built-in buffer. Suddenly the conversation shifts from why aren't you winning to, hey, let's see what the kid's got. We got to give him time to develop. We got to give him patience. And that's true. And hitting on those picks is going to be critical. But let's not forget, Joe Douglas did hit on that one draft, right? Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. That was a phenomenal draft class. But yet the team still stunk. And the team this year, even with those guys, they're not winning. If anything, again, they're worse now. So there's another line for Mad Men, and I don't know if this one applies or not, but there is no plan. You're just Tarzan swinging from vine to vine, meaning there is no long-term plan. You're just kind of pulling it out of your rear end. And I wonder, while this is the smart long-term play, if you're looking for keeping your job and simply NFL survival, but here's the thing. None of that really matters right now because the Jets effectively bagged this season and they moved the goalpost to the future. So what that future will be, is it going to be any better? Well, I certainly would hope so. Nobody knows for sure. Probably will be better than it is right now. You got 2 wins and we're almost to December. And I don't even know if Aaron Glenn can coach at this level yet. And we're almost more than halfway through the season. But these trades, this approach, it gives them a chance to reset the clock and at least be part of that future more so than it feels like right now. So it's definitely a reset, and it's looking at the long game, and it's the best way to stay in the game even when the scoreboard says you're not in the game. Because right now, if you can't sell results, you have to sell hope. And at least for the Jet fan base, it certainly seems like the reaction to it is they're buying hope.
Remember college? Well, now, college is over, and here comes your student loan debt. Is your private student loan debt keeping you up at night? You really need to talk to YRefi. YRefi refinances distressed or defaulted private student loans that others won't touch. They can save you thousands of dollars and get you a custom payment that you can afford. And they don't care what your credit score is. Don't let private student loan debt ruin your life. Call YRefi today.
Okay, finally, it would be nice to go a single episode without mentioning anything in terms of a gambling scandal involving athletes or sports. Unfortunately, that episode is not this episode because we got an update over the weekend on the case against the Guardian pitchers, Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz. The U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of New York indicted both pitchers on 4 separate counts. It was a bunch of conspiracy counts. It's too wordy to remember it specifically. But basically, the main information is the first 3 counts carry a 20-year maximum sentence. And the final one, I think that was money laundering, that carries a 5-year maximum sentence. So even if they don't get convicted of every single thing that they are being charged with, these guys are facing some real jail time. Now, Ortiz was arrested in Boston on Sunday. His attorney, of course, insists he's innocent. Clase, I don't believe yet, is in custody, but is also maintaining his innocence through his attorney. And again, these are allegations. They are not been proven as of yet in a court of law. But what the government basically says happened in their 23-page indictment is basically what we knew, but they did fill in some important details. So what they say was that Clase and Ortiz agreed in advance with gamblers to throw pitches outside the strike zone, specific types of pitches that the guys would be able to bet on, the velocity, the location. So these weren't game outcomes. These were not team wins or anything like that. They were betting on individual pitches, generally to start an inning, and whether it would be a ball or whether it would be a strike. And in exchange, these guys would bet on it, and Clase and Ortiz would receive kickback payments funneled through third parties to kind of help rig those outcomes. Now, the government says Clase was actually the mastermind behind this, and he started doing this as far back as May of 2023. So this has been going on for a while. So we're talking about potentially like 100 rigged pitches. And by 2025, he roped Ortiz into the mix as well. And the bettors, according to the government, made allegedly $400,000 off Clase and about $60,000 off Ortiz, while the players themselves, this is the mind-boggling part, pocketed around $10,000 or less per transaction. So think about that, especially in the case of Clase. This is one of the best relievers in baseball. And he was basically making like $5,000 a pop for throwing pitches outside the strike zone, for rigging pitches. The guy's on a $20 million contract, and he's risking his career, and more importantly, his freedom for, when you're making $20 million, what does $5,000 mean to you? It seems like chump change. Wouldn't even be worth the effort. Now, according to prosecutors, they also have text message evidence. Of course they do, because we all live on our cell phones. A gambler at one point, Clase threw a pitch that was outside the strike zone, but the batter swung, so it was ruled a strike. The bettor lost that bet. He texted a GIF of a guy pretending to hang himself with toilet paper. Clase responded back. Of course he did. It was like these guys were running their fantasy league. And of course, all the evidence is on their cell phones. So again, it's alleged, but the government's not pulling this out of thin air. So the reaction, of course, as it always is to ban FanDuel and DraftKings and all the legal sports betting. And we've kind of covered that before. That would not fix the problem anyway. And the reason we know about this activity is because of the legal sports books. Think about all the gambling things that happened before DraftKings and FanDuel. The Black Sox scandal was not using FanDuel. Pete Rose did not endorse DraftKings. So this stuff goes back a century. Legal or not, gambling has always tempted athletes. The difference now, you would think that the amount of money these guys are making, it would remove them from it. But the access and the volume, they got prop bets on every pitch, on every snap. the temptation is greater than ever. So I don't think that banning gambling is the answer. You can't uninvent that. You can't unring that bell, as they say. The industry is too big. The leagues are financially entangled with it now. So I think and this is not going to solve the problem completely, at least not initially, but the only real thing you can do is consequences, actual jail time for people who are convicted of this. Not suspensions, not indefinite leave, because greed and stupidity, man, they are a potent combination, and you cannot legislate morality. You can't build enough guardrails to protect people from themselves, even when the rewards clearly do not match the risk. But if you truly want to curtail legal gambling for the general public, maybe this is what you need. To be questioning the results more often, to doubt whether or not things are on the level. That's not going to stop the problem gambler, but let's be honest, nothing's going to stop the problem gambler. If he doesn't get his fix with FanDuel, he'll find another source, one that does not take credit card. But I'm talking about if enough of these stories pop up where maybe the casual fan will think twice before reloading their account or placing their parlay. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Gordon Damer on Sports. Do me a favor, if you've listened or watched this long on whatever platform you get the podcast on, hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back later this week with a fresh edition of Gordon Damer on Sports.